Yeah, I don't think Mother knew about this.
Uncle Marvin was strangled by his own beard.
Yep, you never saw it coming.
And welcome to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. I am Fisher, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, it's Women's History Month, Genies, and we've got Gina Philibert Ortega on the show today talking about some great tips on finding your female ancestors. You know, their names are always changing as they would get married or remarried. And she has some great ideas for you to help you out with that kind of research. Plus, Maggie Stevenson is going to be here from our sponsors at Legacy Tree Genealogist talking about ancestors and their pets and interactions with animals. It's an interesting conversation you'll want to hear coming up in a little over 15 minutes. And if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, of course, make sure you take care of that because we give you more of what you need as a genealogist, links to stories you'll find interest in, past and present shows, and a blog from me each week. Just sign up at extremegenes.com or on our Facebook page. Right now, out in Boston, Massachusetts, standing by, clearing his throat, getting ready for some fantastic information for you is the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and American Ancestors.org. It's David Allen Lambert. Hello, David.
Hello, how are you, sir?
I am grand. I got to tell you right now, last night, it was one of those nights where obviously I wasn't going to sleep anytime soon. So I stayed up stupid late till like 1 in the morning. And I went on eBay and I started looking around, not for memorabilia, but for family stuff. And I want everybody listening right now to go on eBay this week and look and see what's out there that might relate to your family. I know I'm like a broken record on this.
But but it's so important.
Oh, my gosh. There were Revolutionary War records. Earlier this year, I bought one for $27, signed by 3 different individuals from an ancestral hometown who were town fathers. One was a close friend of George Washington, and he hosted John Hancock's wedding at his house. It was $27. It was unbelievable. There are letters on there from soldiers from the Civil War, family Bibles on there, 19th century newspapers. I was looking for specific dates, but still, if you're looking for information about the hometown of one of your relatives or just want to get a feel for what life was like there, pick up one of those newspapers. They're like $10. They're ridiculously cheap. Postcards. I got one from the hospital my mother was born in Albany, Oregon in the 1920s. And postcards of my dad's hometown in New Jersey. Even my own junior high school in Connecticut is in a postcard from the very era that I was attending there. And that stuff was all on eBay. You got to check that out.
It's amazing. I mean, just last week, my great-grandfather was a railroad engineer out of Moncton, New Brunswick. It was with the Canadian National Railway. I found 3 postcards of the train station that was the main depot where he was, and one of them actually has 2 trains, and it's about 1915, smack dab when he was an engineer. I mean, it'd be nice to romanticize that one of those is his train, but chances are he probably drove one of them.
Yeah.
So it's amazing stuff. And you're right, family Bibles. And then how about photographs that people have instant ancestors because, oh, wait, the name's on the back of them. Identified photographs, you can buy them for a couple of bucks a piece sometimes.
Yeah.
Like that lady we had on recently in England who buys wedding pictures and returns them. So it could be a random act of genealogical kindness. You find something on eBay, cheap money, you're a genealogist, go out there and find who it belongs to.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, and you never know what you're going to find. I've found things signed by relatives and ancestors and collectible cards that relate to things they were tied to. So this is a challenge to every genie listening right now. Go on eBay this week. Go on it today and see what might be out there relating to your ancestors, your ancestral towns, and the time periods in which they lived. I mean, you'll find it fascinating, even if you don't find anything, the amount of stuff that's out there. All right, David, let's get on with our family histoire news today. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think I'd like to start with millions of available genealogical records for Lithuanian Jewish families that have been put online from MyHeritage. Now, these documents are from 20 years of work from a special interest group online called Litvak for Lithuanian genealogy, and this is just a recent addition to the millions of records that are already on MyHeritage. And we have deep nostalgia, but now we also have more deep research that you can do. For Lithuanian families, this could be the thing that might unlock your family overseas.
Awesome.
We're talking about eBay and about buying things. I could tell you Elizabeth Lee Barron, who works at the University of Tampa as a librarian, probably scours it all the time. And one of the things with eBay, you can set certain searches for certain things. She collects box covers from oranges. Remember the old orange boxes that have like an advertisement? It might have somebody on a beach eating an orange. She collects these because her family had an orange grove in Winter Haven, Florida, and her dad is on some of the advertisements back in the 30s as a little kid holding an orange eating it.
See, I mean, everybody's got something unique in their family history that makes collecting possible. That's a great story. Love it.
Yeah, more power to her. And apparently oranges are a healthy way to do genealogy in Florida. The next thing I want to mention is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, everybody's heard about them, but those were found over 60 years ago. Well, they found new fragments of these biblical texts just recently, and the Israeli Antiquities Authority announced that they have found these fragments that are thousands of years old. They also uncovered a 6,000-year-old partially mummified skeleton of a child, as well as a 10,500-year-old basket, which looks like it was just put down a while ago.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. It's
Isn't
amazing
that fun?
what they've uncovered. Yeah, so, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947. These are just fragments, mind you, but when you're dealing with fragments from thousands of years ago found in a cave, everyone counts because it helps build the stories. It's great stuff. Genealogy is great. I love connecting with people, and I hope that we hear from some of our listeners about the discoveries they made by your prompting to go onto eBay, because there must be some great stories of rediscovery just waiting to happen. Well, that's about all I have from Beantown for you this week, Fish. And I just want to tell people, if you go to AmericanAncestors.org and if you decide to join as a member, you can save $20 if you use the coupon code EXTREME.
All right,
Catch
David.
you on the back end.
Yep, as we talk Ask Us Anything a little bit later on. It's Women's History Month this month, and Gina Philibert Ortega is coming up next with tips on how you can trace your female ancestors back through time when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, Krista Callan is back with me from Ancestry.com. And Krista, here it is, St. Paddy's Day month, and a lot of people are doing a lot of Irish research right now, and you've got a lot of new databases covering this.
We do. Besides our Find a Grave updates, which include some Irish records, we've also got several databases of Irish records that have been updated, and maybe some that people just haven't discovered yet.
Well, with Irish ancestry historically being such a difficult thing to do, this is exciting news for a lot of people of Irish extraction.
Absolutely.
And then you've also got spring cleaning going on right now with the Home Edit ladies.
Yeah, Joanna and Clea have teamed up with Ancestry to help you uncover some of those old photos and documents you may have lying around your house as you do your spring cleaning.
All right, and where can they find this great information on Ancestry?
If you go to our blog at blogs, that's blogs.ancestry.com, they've got a lot of great advice for us there.
All right, thanks so much, Krista. Talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Anytime is a great time to learn more about your family. Did you miss Roots Tech Connect this year? It's not too late to experience Roots Tech classes, keynotes, and how-to content. Just visit rootstech.org to see what you missed and to experience Roots Tech Connect on your own timetable. Select inspiring and insightful messages that will help you in your pursuit to connect with and share your family story in new ways. You can then use the free resources found at FamilySearch.org or the Family Search Family Tree app to have a deeper personal experience getting to know your family, past and present. Connecting with family and learning about your ancestors provides healing, peace, and a sense of belonging. And it's easy to share what you learn with others to help and inspire them as well. Visit rootstech.org for some inspiration or visit familysearch.org to continue on your journey of family discovery today.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G. Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
All right, back at it on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, and it's Women's History Month, and I couldn't think of a better person to have on the show to talk about finding your female ancestors this month than Gina Philibert Ortega. Welcome back to the show, Gina. It's been a long time.
Thank you for having me, Fisher. It's great to be back. I love Extreme Genes, and I'm so happy to talk about this subject.
Well, you've been blogging about it for some time at philibertfamily.blogspot.com, and it's time we got a few tips out there because tracing female ancestors can be a little more challenging, especially because of all the name changes.
Absolutely. There's a few reasons why it's such a challenge. Besides the name change, you also have women's legal status throughout time. And so they're just not recorded in the same way as men are.
Right.
So can I give you 4 tips for researching female ancestors?
Please do. Let's start at the beginning. What's number 1?
Okay. So for me, number 1 is probably something that's really obvious, but it's so important, and that is to keep a timeline. Now, why is that important? Well, to do really good research, you need to know what you know and what you're missing. And a timeline helps you to see what dates you're missing, what you need to fill in, what you do know. And so I like to keep a combination timeline research log so that I can see exactly what's missing out of her life and then start looking for those records.
Absolutely.
So that would be my number 1 for you.
I am a huge advocate of timelines for so many reasons. And part of, I think, doing a great timeline involves not only doing the timeline of the person, but of the family at the same period, of the community at the same period, the larger area, and maybe even the country and then the world. What's going on there? Because that can tell you an awful lot of things.
Absolutely. And, it's a good idea to populate that timeline with some of those historical events that would impact her life. Like, let's say, World War II. You might think, well, what's that got to do with my female ancestor who's living that time period? Well, maybe she has a husband or a son who's off to war. Maybe she went to work during that time period. So having those historical moments that would have impacted our ancestors' life is vital. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Everybody likes to do this in a different way. If you're using Ancestry, that timeline is kind of built into your ancestors' profile in your family tree. If you're using Roots Magic, for example, and this is true for pretty much every software program, they have a timeline. So you can either take advantage of those and what they offer, or you can create your own.
Absolutely. All right. Great tip. Number 2.
Well, something that you just said kind of goes into my number 2, which is what exists for that time and place that she lives in. So this is one of the things that I think we as researchers are often guilty of, is we just dive into the research and we don't think about time and place, because time and place impacts what records exist. And so I'll tell you a real easy way for you to figure out what's available for a time and place. You can go to the Family Search catalog. So just go to familysearch.org, click on Search at the top of the toolbar, then Catalog, put in the county and state that she's from, and see what Family Search has for that time and place. Look through every subject category so that you get a good sense of what's available and what records exist that you haven't looked at. It's a big mistake to think that everything is online. And so doing some catalog searches are going to help you see what is available for a time and place.
And to your point, of course, a lot of these records have not been properly indexed, and you can still go through them online just by browsing, and you can find all kinds of things there. And I should mention, too, Gina, it seems appropriate at this time, over the last month or so, I've gone into newspaper sites, and I have browsed through papers where I thought information should be, and I found 3 different things that were not indexed. It didn't come up in the search engine for some reason. No idea why. It wasn't any problem with the paper being crinkled or ink being spread or names being misspelled. They just weren't there. They didn't show up that way. But when I did the browsing, I found what I had always been looking for, and there it was. What a shock.
And that's why research is much more than just searching. It's also browsing and getting to know the record set.
Yep.
So you do that by going through catalogs, by browsing databases like you mentioned. Read some local histories or histories of women in that place and time, because that's going to give you an idea of what the author used to do their research, and that might open up records that you had no idea existed. There's some records that exist for women that people don't normally think of because they're not the standard census, vital record, the same old comforting genealogy records that we're all used to.
Right, the standards.
Yeah, exactly.
And what would some of those be?
Well, one of the things that I think about is there's some records from about the 1850s called femme sole trader records. And these are records, you can find them in Pennsylvania, in California, and a few other states, that are a court record that allowed women to conduct business without their husband and to be financially responsible. And these are court records that have her name, her husband's name. They put her in place and time, so they're very valuable. So there's things like that. Voting records. Last year, we celebrated the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and very few genealogists actually use voting records because, quite frankly, they're not research friendly. They don't exist for all places. Not everyone voted. But, there's some early Boston voting records where women voted for school elections, and those include naturalization information. But if you don't go and see what exists for time and place, you miss out on that.
Wow, great point. All right, what's number 3?
Well, I sort of hinted to number 3 just now. What records name women? And so that's really important because as genealogists, we tend to focus on government records and, like the census. But in some cases, they don't give us the information that we had hoped for. So you mentioned newspapers, Fisher, and I love newspapers. And think about what newspapers can provide us about women. One of the things that people lament is not knowing what is her maiden name because of those frequent, surname changes when you marry. But what if her mother dies or her father dies or her brother? Well, that obit might list her under her married name as a survivor, but now you've got her brother's name or her father's name, and you now know her maiden name.
Yep.
So we got to think in terms of what names women. And some of these are just general sources we're all familiar with, but then others are specific to women. So, for example, one that I love is community cookbooks. I was just reading one last night. That's what I do before I go to bed at night. And it was one for the ladies of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic. And it listed the woman's name. It listed where she's from, what ladies of the GAR she was a part of. It gave all kinds of information that probably isn't anywhere else. And so when we look at women, we've got to look at what's specific to women. And that might be needlework samplers, that might be signature quilts, community cookbooks, women's organizations. So the things that women are involved in. And the way you figure that out is, once again, you could do it through the Family Search Catalog. You could look at city directories, local histories. You can also ask yourself, what is her husband involved in? She might be involved in some auxiliary to an organization he belongs to or something to do with his work. So you have to look at that as well.
Boy, that's great. Good tip. All right, number 4.
So my last one is going to probably sound a little negative at first, but bear with me.
Okay.
That's my warning. You don't know what you don't know. And I love this little saying because it's so true.
Yep.
And it's something that I'm always amazed at what I personally don't know as I start reading and talking to people. So as genealogists, no matter how long we've been doing this, we need to connect with others. And whether that is listening to webinars online, attending a conference like Roots Tech virtually, going to Genealogy Society meetings, talking to other genealogists. One of the things that struck me as I was looking at Extreme Genes and listening, and you had a guest a few weeks ago who talked about Gretna greens.
Yes.
Now, a lot of genealogists don't know what a Gretna green is. But think about what a wonderful resource that can be for understanding the women in our family tree who we can't find a marriage record for. That Gretna green is so important. And those Gretna greens, there's also places where people ran off to get divorced.
Yes.
So
that's where my parents met, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So, like you think about Reno, for example. So those are things that we need to know, and we may not know that we don't know. So listening to Extreme Genes, going and listening to webinars, that's how we learn those things.
She's Gina Philibert Ortega, and it's Women's History Month, so there's a little idea for how you might be able to trace some of your female ancestors. Really great ideas, Gina. I appreciate it. And where can they follow you?
Well, so this month on my blog, Gina's Genealogy, which is at philibertfamily.blogspot.com, I am blogging about women and researching women at the museum.
Awesome. That sounds so much fun. Well, thanks for taking the time to come on and talk about it, and look forward to catching up with you again in the future.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Fisher.
And coming up next, Maggie Stevenson from Legacy Tree Genealogist talking about pets and wild animals and your ancestors in 5 minutes. Welcome back. It's America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes, and extremegenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And I'm very excited to have Maggie Stevenson on the show today. She's with our sponsors, Legacy Tree Genealogist, and she's recently written a blog about ancestral pets. And, they do become parts of our family. But I was really amazed how deep in the weeds you got with this, Maggie. Tell us how you got started on this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Scott. So a couple of years ago, I was going through my great-grandfather's diaries, which are at my dad's house in Scotland, and I found a eulogy that he had written to the family dog, a little mongrel which had died unexpectedly. And it was beautiful. It was full of real love and affection for the animal and showed the distress that any family goes through when they love a pet and lose a pet. So I thought It would be interesting to try and find out if other people and other families had any documents or photographs or stories that they would like to share about their ancestors' pets or experiences with animals or anything like that that could show us that animals and humans have been inseparable for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, when you deal with, say, for instance, a pedigree chart, we don't include the pets, obviously, among the children of the people.
Right.
But when you do stories about families, pets often play a prominent role in them.
That's right. Yeah. And that's what I found when I decided to ask the Legacy Tree team if they would share any stories. The Legacy Tree team are big pet lovers. We have cat owners, dog owners, probably a couple of horses in there as well. And the team was very happy to share stories and photographs from their family histories of their ancestors' connections with animals.
I'm curious how far back some of these stories went.
That's a good question. I think where there was photographic evidence of a connection to an animal, for example, we have somebody hugging a calf, and this was from the 1930s, I believe.
Okay.
And this was from a farm where obviously the family had livestock that presumably were not meant to be pets, but the family became attached to some of them. I think there is one from the mid-1800s, which was a newspaper report, Utah in 1862, about an encounter with a wildcat. So that is the oldest one that I was given. I'm sure that there must be other newspaper reports of anybody's ancestors meeting some kind of interesting animal when they're out walking or horse riding, and I'm sure there are interesting stories attached to that too.
Well, I have one in my own family where my fourth great-grandfather, who was in the Revolution, he had his first little girl, and she was 2 years old, and they were riding a horse. And the horse tripped over something and threw them both down, and the little girl was killed. And this was in like 1788. Oh, no. It was just a horrible thing. But, you know, this is the role the animals played in the humans' lives, and it's part of their story, you know?
And was that something that you found in a newspaper?
I did, yes. It was actually reproduced in several newspapers in the New England area at the time. The way they used the language back then was really quite unique. I think the last phrase was, and it put a period to the little girl's life.
Yes. I found that reading the report about the encounter with the wildcat, that the story and the way that they wrote it, although it was quite a young boy, I believe, who had had the encounter, the way that it was written was clearly not the young boy's words. It was a very newspaperly, journalistic tone.
Yes.
That, you know, it wasn't necessarily the complete first-hand account. But, yes, I didn't have any tragic stories come out, other than obviously the death of the pets. But finding that this interaction with animals has led to the death of a family member is also something I'm sure that there are other stories like that out there.
Sure. So I'm curious if some of the team talked about perhaps writing things about their pet when they passed. I mean, I went through this 8 years ago. We had to put down our dog of almost 16 years that we were very close to, and it was just devastating. And that night, we just sat around and we started just writing down all these memories we'd had about this dog, about the nicknames we'd call it, about how it liked to play soccer and balance a soccer ball on its nose and play with children out on the playground, and how it would chase a squirrel under a bunch of rocks, and one time actually had to be rescued by the fire department. They came out with their hook and ladder and and punched a hole in the ground and pulled her out. And then she wanted to go right back in there after being stuck in there for 3 hours. She said hello and then wanted to go back after the squirrel. I mean, just insane stuff. But when we got done, we had pages and pages and pages of amazing memories of this dog. And then we started going through photographs to create a folder around it. And we found it really comforting to go through that process. But that's a part of our story. And it also helped in the grieving process.
And I think that's a really interesting point, and it's really beautiful that you did that as a family, to memorialize your pet and the memories, the good times that you spent with it. We did have a team member who told me about the eulogy that she had written for the family dog when it died a few years ago. And it was really beautiful, and it was exactly as you described, thinking about the memories, the good times, the times the dog was naughty. And I think that's a really important thing to think about when you're documenting things for the future. Why not document and record the memories of your family's pets? We've elevated pets to the position of a family member. So why not keep those records and write eulogies for them? As you say, it also helps with the grieving process. So I think it's a really lovely thing to do.
Yeah, I think there's so much interaction there that can add to the stories of the family. Not so much the family tree or pushing that back, but actually just figuring out the stories, because I think what kind of animals you own, how many you own, that all tells a lot about an ancestor as well, if you can track that down.
Exactly. And I'm sure that if some people, after hearing this, start digging around, they may find that their ancestors had pets or animals that they didn't know about. I think it's a really fascinating area of research that probably many people haven't considered.
Right. And I think if you went to a county archive somewhere, you might also discover that there are applications for licenses for animals that your ancestors may have applied for, some of them going back to the late 19th century.
Right. I know that in the UK, we had to have dog licenses for a long time. I'm not sure if we still do. So there are certainly records of those, although I believe the ones that are publicly available tend to be the Irish dog licenses. And I'm not sure that those dogs were pets, perhaps more working dogs or guard dogs. And it's unlikely to have the name that was given to the animal or anything like that. But still, it's an interesting resource to consider that you could go looking for something like that.
Yeah, when you consider, you might be able to determine what kind of dog your great-grandparents owned or how many of them that they had. I mean, it does tell something about that ancestor.
Exactly. And I think it would be interesting also, I'm sure there must be ancestors out there who had more exotic pets. I didn't come across any of those when I was talking to the team, but I know from information about the way that pets were memorialized in Victorian times, certainly in England, there were monkeys and snakes and bears. Some of these animals ended up in pet cemeteries.
Sure.
There is a famous dog cemetery in Hyde Park in London. And I read earlier today that there are actually some pet monkeys that managed to be buried in the dog cemetery. Pets were given their own cemetery because the church did not want animals to be buried on consecrated ground.
She's Maggie Stevenson. She's with our sponsors, Legacy Tree Genealogists, and has written a blog about ancestors and their pets. And we appreciate the conversation. Maggie, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Thank you.
And coming up next in 3 minutes, David Allen Lambert returns for another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G. Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
All right, Krista Cowan is back with me from Ancestry.com. And Krista, here it is, St. Paddy's Day month, and a lot of people are doing a lot of Irish research right now, and you've got a lot of new databases covering this.
We do. Besides our Find a Grave updates, which include some Irish records, we've also got several databases of Irish records that have been updated, and maybe some that people just haven't discovered yet.
Well, with Irish ancestry historically being such a difficult thing to do, this is exciting news for a lot of people of Irish extraction.
Absolutely.
And then you've also got spring cleaning going on right now with the Home Edit ladies.
Yeah, Joanna and Clea have teamed up with Ancestry to help you uncover some of those old photos and documents you may have lying around your house as you do your spring cleaning.
All right, and where can they find this great information on Ancestry?
If you go to our blog at blogs, that's blogs.ancestry.com, they've got a lot of great advice for us there.
All right, thanks so much, Krista. Talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Well, genies, what a time we're all going through right now. And with all this time on our hands, you probably agree the best lemonade we can make out of this is to sharpen our genie axes and learn how to extend our family trees, gather more photos and documents, and discover those remarkable family stories our descendants can benefit from for generations. Well, I have more time now, too, and I want to help you learn what you need to know. That's why I've created a new Facebook group, Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. I'm so pleased that so many of you have already signed up and are helping us to create a supportive community of family history researchers. On this page, we can brainstorm and share ideas on how to tear down those brick walls that we all have. So feel free to join us. The Facebook page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Feel at home with others who live in our Genie world and want to make the most of this unique time. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Join us. And we are back for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. David Allen Lambert is in the house, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. And Dave, this question comes from Ron in Lexington, Kentucky. He says, Fish and Dave, how do I find where my ancestor served during the Civil War for 2.5 years before he was injured?
Okay.
Great question, Ron. Thank you very much.
The place you want to go first are the official records, and that would be the compiled military service records for the Union Army that are at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Now, some of those are starting to be digitized already by Fold3. So Fold3.com, which is owned by Ancestry, have gone through, for instance, Massachusetts, all the compiled military service jackets for each soldier are done. And what these basically are is they went through with the War Department years ago in the muster rolls, which is line by line by line for each soldier each time there was a muster. And they put them on individual cards, and they would put David Lambert, July to August, 1862, present, 12th Massachusetts, or absent, or AWOL, or dead.
Or sick, or injured, or wounded, yeah.
Exactly. But there was always a place on it that would say where the regiment was, so that usually where the muster was taken. The other thing is a pension file. In my estimation, the best $80 you could ever spend for 100 pages of a time capsule of your ancestors' military career, both during and after the war. But what you would find in it are letters and affidavits about maybe an injury or a hospitalization or some event that they were at a particular battle and were injured. There's great detail in that as well, even if the service record doesn't have a lot.
And I had a great experience with that myself with my wife's Civil War ancestor who was thought to have died in Libby Prison down in the South. Well, it turned out that in his folder was a statement from 5 of his colleagues explaining how he was shot off the back of a horse riding a supply train at the rear of Sherman's army. And so we'd have never had that story without that folder. But Dave, Ron is in Lexington, Kentucky, so I'm wondering if his soldier was from the Confederacy.
And you can find Confederacy records on Family Search as well as some on Ancestry. So that should be helpful. They're not as detailed, but you will find them. Sometimes you will find the first initial of the person. So it might say D. Lambert. So sometimes it's hard to know if you're dealing with a Douglas, a David, or a Donald.
Right.
So that can be tough. But a lot of times it will be spelled out later on, the full name. The other thing is the national parks will help both Union and Confederate with their Soldiers and Sailors database, which is free from the national parks. You just Google search Soldier and Sailors search National Parks NPS. And then you will find this database, which was compiled by volunteers well over 20 years ago. This database will give you the enlistment date and the rank, et cetera, of the particular person. But the best part of it is if you want to know where they are, all you have to do is click on the regiment. It hyperlinks you right to a description of the actual regiment. And then within that description of when they started the regiment to when they mustered out finally are all the battles. And those are hyperlinked and will take you to the National Park site or to the history of that actual battle.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. And then you can get into actually tracking down other descendants and seeing what stories existed in those particular lines, oral histories.
It's very true. And then especially with the pensions, because you get the affidavits and finding collateral people that may have been in the same regiment. And I always say it's good to look up the pensions of those individuals because you never know if your ancestor scratched his back because he did him a favor and wrote a story. Well, I was at the Battle of Shiloh and remember when Thomas Jones was injured. Well, Thomas Jones had talked about an injury at Gettysburg for your ancestor. So returning the favor, an affidavit search and looking at both soldiers is great.
All right, great question, Ron. Thanks so much. And we got another question coming up next as we continue with Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show in 3 minutes. All right, back for our final segment of Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, with David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. And Dave, we have a question from Pam in Phoenix. And she's saying, guys, my great uncle was a bit movie actor in the 1930s. How might I find some of his movies? They sure as heck aren't on Netflix.
Well, that sounds like a question directed to you because of your dear sweet mom who was in movies back in those days.
Well, yeah, 1940s for her. And also, there was a first cousin of my grandfather who was a bit player in the 20s and 30s and even in silent films. So
those are often harder to find because a lot of those have disappeared.
They have, but he did survive long enough to do some talkies in the 1930s. In fact, some serialized stuff. But it was really interesting when I went to try to search for some of these things. Back before the internet was a big thing, it was really difficult. But I have found on eBay, here we go again with that, David, actual DVDs made of these old movies that are often now out of copyright, and people were selling them for $5. And so I would pick that up, and I was able to obtain movies of my mother that way, and also movies of this first cousin of my grandfather. And it was really funny to see him in these because he had more prominent roles than my mom did. But there are also IMDb listings for these individuals. So if they were ever involved in the film business, you'll often see listings for them there. I will say, though, that those do not necessarily include every flick that they were ever in. They should. But for some reason, not everybody is given credits for movies that they appeared in. But I've also found on YouTube that you can find movies. And my mom was in a movie in the late 1940s with Cornell Wilde and Linda Darnell. And it was a time period piece, and it was a real long movie. So they broke it down into pieces, but all of it's on YouTube. So I was actually able to go through and just watch the movie, and where I would pick her up, I would stop and do a screen capture. So I'd get a photograph of her basically in the movie with these stars. And I remember some of the stories that Mom would tell about being in these flicks, how, for instance, she would walk back and forth behind the scene of the action so she could make sure that she was seen in the movie. She was only in it for like a year and a half or whatever, but she got a lifetime of stories out of it. So there are really just a ton of places you can look. Do a Google search on your... It's amazing how many people skip the Google search. They never think of that. Oh, and one other thing that crosses my mind is local newspaper stories. Everybody loves the story of the local kid who makes good. And when my mother was making her breaks and getting her opportunities, they did stories on her all the time. One with a very glamorous photograph of her and talking about the latest pick that she's in. And my grandparents made sure that the local papers picked up her stories so that their friends and neighbors could go see her at the local theater back in the 1940s. And it was a big kick for all of them. That's a good clue. The other one is if you have old family letters. I found out from some letters my mother had saved from her brother, my Uncle Wayne, the names of some of the flicks that she was in and some of the roles she played and how excited he was about it. So you really have to take almost an all-encompassing look at this, not only the research that's available online, that's on YouTube, that might be on eBay, but what's within the family as well and on newspaper sites. I hope that helps because it's a whole heck of a lot of fun to find these old movies that your relatives or your family members are in. So thanks for the question. And David, thank you for coming on again this week. We'll catch you again next week.
Talk to you then.
And, of course, if you have a question for Ask Us Anything, all you have to do is email us at askusanything@extremegenes.com. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for joining us. If you missed any of it, of course, catch the podcast on extremegenes.com, TuneIn Radio, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Talk to you next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.